Welcome back to another episode of Occult in the Ordinary, where we examine elements of horror and other spooky stuff present in non-horror games. In today's episode, we're talking about Psychonauts. Psychonauts begins in the remote government training facility Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp, a place where children are trained to hone their psychic abilities and eventually join the Psychonauts, an elite group of psychic super spies. We play as Rasputin Aquato, a psychic prodigy who infiltrates the facility to achieve his dream of becoming a psychonaut. While the adults in charge aren't happy with the intruder, they allow Raz to stay at camp until his father arrives to pick him up. The next day, we're free to explore camp. Whispering Rock is divided up into several major areas. Most of them aren't particularly spooky or unsettling, so we'll brush through them real quick. First, we've got the kids' cabin area. Obviously, this is where the kids sleep. I really love the dingy cabins. I always thought they looked like repurposed chicken coops. It's kind of funny to think that a prestigious organization like the Psychonauts can be so frugal. Next, there's the main campgrounds. This area is where you'll find the main lodge and the parking lot. There's this giant log in the parking lot that chronicles the history of Whispering Rock. It's pretty cool. After that, there's the GPC and Wilderness area. Now, this is one of the few unnerving areas at camp. Head through this hollowed out log and you'll be greeted by the geodesic psycho-isolation chambers. These giant domes are sensory deprivation cells for psychics. Place someone in here and they won't be able to use any of their psychic abilities. I assume that these are for kids who struggle to control their powers, but the cells are pretty extreme. No way to see the outside world, nothing to stimulate the mind, just pure darkness in these cushions.
Hey, check out this weird button.
Yeah, no! Don't put me back in there, please! I'll be good.
Hey, boss. Boss, what's wrong?
Yeah, nothing. It's just that button reminds me of a bad place, that's all.
While the cells alone are pretty creepy, an even greater terror awaits just beyond the wire fences of the GPC. Venture into the forest and you'll encounter some of Whispering Rock's hostile wildlife. One of the summer camp's infamous Psy Bears. The bears at Whispering Rock are enhanced with psychic abilities, earning them the name Psy Bears. Instead of chasing you on all fours, bears use levitation to pursue their prey with ease. The bears can also use telekinesis to grab hold of their targets, allowing them to catch up and effortlessly maul their prey. If you try to hide on a ledge out of the bear's reach, they'll use telekinesis to knock you down. What makes the bears especially horrifying is that they can be encountered shortly after completing the first level, when Raz is at his weakest. At this point, your fists may be your only weapon at your disposal, and close combat isn't a great option. Without any long-range attacks, your best bet is to run. I still remember when I first heard the roar of a Psy Bear. I remember frantically swinging the camera around, trying desperately to catch the source of the noise. Seeing a bear coming at me was terrifying enough, but when I saw that telekinesis hand launch out at me and hold me in place, instant nightmare fuel. It didn't help that there were also multiple bears spread out all around camp. Now, the psychic abilities are cool and all, but how exactly can the wildlife use these powers? Agent Ford Kreller of the Psychonauts explains that the wildlife here are mutated by Psytanium. This is a quartz-like mineral that reacts to and amplifies psychic abilities. Whispering Rock Summer Camp was actually built on top of a huge Psytanium deposit. Remember that log I mentioned in the parking lot? The documents on the log state that 500 years ago, a Psytanium-bearing meteorite had struck Earth, leaving behind a giant crater. 55 years ago, this crater was flooded with water, creating the camp's Lake Oblongata. Just 5 years prior to the events of the game, the summer camp was created on the land near the now flooded crater. Despite that crater being filled, the soil of Whispering Rock is still very rich with Psytanium, resulting in numerous creatures wielding psychic powers. Speaking of this flooded crater, the last area at camp is the boathouse and beach area. Here at Lake Oblongata, we're introduced to Raz's fear of water. The origins of this fear are incredibly dark. As Raz explains, his entire family was cursed by a psychic so that they would all die in water. So anytime you touch deep water, a hand swiftly rises from the surface and attempts to grab you. There's even a horrific little sound that plays as the hand emerges. Fail to hop on back over to land in time, and the hand will drag you underneath the waves. Well, better than a shark, I guess. In the Psychonauts manual, the hand that rises out from the water is referred to as the Hand of Galokio. The manual explains that this hand is a phenomenon that only Raz and his family can see. According to Raz's father, Augustus Aquato, the Galokios were a family of psychics that envied the Aquatos. Augustus adds that not only did the Galokios curse the Aquatos, but they also killed Augustus's side of the family. This moment is ultimately what spurred Augustus's hatred for psychics. I adore how the Hand of Galokio is embedded into the story. The devs could have easily made Raz just incapable of swimming and had a little drowning animation play whenever you touched water. Instead, we get this dark backstory that helps us better understand Raz and his relationship with his father. It's also incredible how they expand upon this hydrophobia in Psychonauts 2. Anyways, now that we've familiarized ourselves with the camp, let's discuss some of our fellow campers. Aside from Raz, there are 20 campers present at Whispering Rock. They're really not too scary. In fact, each of them exhibit really fun and quirky personalities. The campers also have their own story arcs that unfold as you progress through the game. However, since these side stories are completely optional, it's really easy to miss them. These cutscenes also aren't the only way to learn more about each camper. One of the most valuable resources for getting a better understanding of everyone is through campster.me, a webpage that used to be hosted on the Double Fine website to promote Psychonauts. This webpage functions as a fictional social networking site that features all the campers present in the game, with Raz being the exception. Campster provides tons of supplemental information regarding the campers. On each character's profile, we can see their interests, their photos, comments left by other campers, and much, much more. We'll be referencing this site frequently in regards to each camper. Now, while the campers themselves won't have you screaming in terror, many of them possess pretty grim backstories. These stories are especially shocking to uncover since many of the campers seem so carefree, hence why we're talking about a few of them now. Let's begin with a look at Dogen Bull, Raz's best friend at camp. One of Dogen's most notable features is the tinfoil hat that he wears. This tinfoil hat was given to Dogen to suppress a powerful and frightening ability. In the opening cutscene, Dogen tells Raz that he once made someone's head explode. We never get specifics about the incident or when it happened, but we do know that's why he was given the tinfoil hat. His About Me section mentions that his family made sure that he never removed his hat. If he ever did, his family would all scream in terror. Eventually, they convinced Dogen to wear his hat by promising him a pet. All he has to do to get his pet is get through camp without blowing anyone up. At the start of the game, you can find Dogen near the cabin speaking with the local squirrels via telepathy. He claims that the squirrels are telling him to kill everyone. When Raz asks about what's going on, Dogen says that the squirrels are lying and urges Raz not to trust them. When you start to leave the area, you see how Dogen handles his squirrel problem. When you see those severed squirrel bits rain down on Dogen, it really sets in that, yes, Dogen is actually capable of making things explode with his mind. What makes this moment even more disturbing is that Dogen was able to do all this while wearing his tinfoil hat, an item that's supposed to quell his explosive abilities. It's possible that Dogen had an easier time making the squirrels explode due to their small size, but it's still extremely alarming. Dogen's Campster page reveals that one of his favorite movies is Scanners. For those that are unfamiliar, this is a horror film about psychics. This movie is pretty well known for a scene where a man uses his powers to make someone's head explode. In fact, Dogen has a GIF of this scene in his photo collection on Campster. He also has 2 other images of heads exploding, which I can't really show here. It's sort of funny in a morbid way because you have all these graphic images right next to photos of puppies and a kitten. I'm curious to know if Scanners had somehow played a role in developing Dogen's explosive power, or if Dogen just loved the movie because he could relate to a film about psychics that struggle to control their powers. Either way, it's definitely not a film that a 9-year-old should be watching. Next up, I want to talk about Elton Fur and Milka Phage, mainly because their story arc at camp revolves around the two ending up in a relationship. Starting with Elton, he's got a deep love for the sea and its inhabitants. His main interests on his Campster page are aquapsychic exploration and deep-sea telepathy. It's likely that his love for the sea was brought about by his father, who was in the Navy. In Elton's About Me section, he explains that he never saw his father much. Then on one tragic day, his father's ship sank. This traumatic experience served as the origin of Elton's hydrophobia, which he tells Raz about when he first heads down to Lake Oblongata. In spite of his fears, Elton still harbors love for sea life. Elton's About Me section adds that he was raised by his mother in a, quote, big hotel just for ladies. Men from the Navy would frequent this hotel, and whenever Elton asked about it, his mom told him that these men were coming to offer their condolences about the tragedy. I think the implication here is that Elton's mom worked at some type of brothel or strip club, the men from the Navy being some of her clients, perhaps even Elton's father, resulting in Elton's conception. In Elton's favorite music section of his Campster page, he writes, "I can play the accordion. My mom used to make me promise all the time in a closet." It's clear that Elton's closet band practice was used as a way to drown out the sound of the special activities occurring. Elton discovered his skill with telepathy when he would visit the beaches near his home. He writes that he initially thought he could hear the voice of his father calling out to him. He quickly realized, however, that he was actually listening to the thoughts of fish. I like to believe that Elton enjoyed communicating with the fish so often because they told him about his father. It may have been how Elton coped with his father's death and the loneliness that came with it. Next, there's Milka Phage, a master of invisibility. If you try to approach her at camp, she will vanish when you get close. She'll only reappear when you go away. In Milka's About Me section, she writes that her mom asks her to be invisible because she looks too much like her father. To keep her mom from becoming upset, Milka tries to remain invisible at all times. She was once able to stay invisible for 3 days straight. This feat is extremely impressive when you consider that Raz can only stay invisible for a short while. Even when he obtains the upgraded version of invisibility, it's nowhere near the length of a whole day. Staying invisible is the only way that Milka can spend time with her mother without her, quote, saying something mean. Despite claims in her Campster page saying that she enjoys being invisible, it's clear that this isolation is taking a huge toll on Milka. Her favorite book is Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. This book is about two siblings, Peter and Fudge Hatcher. The story focuses on Peter's frustration with his brother Fudge receiving preferential treatment from their parents. That's actually where the book's title comes from, as Peter feels like nothing in the eyes of his parents. Peter feels invisible around his family, something that Milka can easily relate to. The closest thing that Milka has to a friend is her cat, which is capable of seeing her even when she's invisible, walking on eggshells to avoid setting off her mother's vile behavior. Now that we understand both Milka and Elton's backstories, it seems obvious that the two would gravitate towards one another. They hold multiple similarities, like their difficult home lives, missing fathers, and the fact that animals help them cope with their issues. Funnily enough, we learn at camp that Elton and Milka originally had feelings for other campers. Elton originally had a crush on Lily Zanotto, and Milka originally had a crush on Quentin Hedgemouse. On Campster, we can see that Elton leaves numerous comments on Lily's profile, desperately trying to get her attention. She ignores him, obviously, but Elton remains persistent. He even asks Raz if he has a crush on Lily and gets relieved when Raz says he doesn't. Milka, on the other hand, had her sights set on Quentin until she suffered a violent seizure. On Milka's Campster page, we can see comments from Chop Sweetwind and Phoebe Love expressing concern for Milka after the incident. The comment from Phoebe confirms that the seizure happened on the night of May 18th, 2003. Oddly enough, on that same night, Milka left a comment on Elton's Campster page. Later on May 28th, Milka leaves another comment on Elton's page that explains the incident in detail. She claims that her seizure was so severe that she started speaking Latin. During the seizure, Milka also had a vision that revealed that Elton is the one she should be with, not Quentin. Though for some strange reason, Milka keeps calling Quentin Crispin. Maybe it was the name he used during development and they changed it last minute, I'm guessing. We see Milka successfully catch Elton's attention at the beach and boathouse area. Here you can find the camp's bullies Bobby Zilch and Benny Fidello abusing a fish. Elton's upset by this, but too timid to face Bobby and Benny. Milka handles the situation by going invisible and using the fish to scare off the bullies, which finally gets Elton to notice her. After this, we can see Elton and Milka kissing by the cave that leads to the GPC and wilderness area. It's really satisfying to see the duo come together after learning of the hardships they've had to endure. To know that they'll at least have each other is a very sweet conclusion to their story. Now, last on the list of campers I want to discuss is Crystal Snagrash and Clem Foot. I want to talk about them as a pair because they are inseparable at camp. I can hardly recall a time when we see one without the other. Crystal and Clem are the cheerleaders of the camp. Their psychic specialties are inspiration and spirit. When we see them around the camp or during certain levels, they're constantly cheering on others and spewing positivity. The never-ending cheering and high energy annoys most of the campers, as we can see on Clem's Campster page. Elton comments, "Wow, you guys are kinda high energy." JT comments, "Clem's a can-do fella. I like that, just not so much around me, but from a distance." Vernon comments, "Clem is cool. Talks a lot, but he's basically cool." Even Raz, who gets along with pretty much everyone, will tell the duo to shut up during the first level.
Punchy punch punch! Punch! Hooray! Yay, Raz!
Punch! Hooray!
Shut up, shut up!
We'll never give up on you, Raz!
Crystal and Clem make numerous posts on the Campster pages rooting for the other campers. On the surface, it seems like the two are just trying their best to get along with everyone at camp. They even try repeatedly to get Bobby Zilch on their friends list. However, over the course of the game, we learn about Crystal and Clem's special project. After the first level, we can find the two on top of a platform near the speakers in the main campgrounds area. After Raz speaks with them, the duo turn their back and begin mixing two chemicals. Whenever you get far away from Crystal and Clem, they continue mixing. Get too close and they will quickly hide these objects and start cheering. If Raz tries to speak with them, they feign ignorance.
Hey, what are you guys doing up here?
Writing cheers!
Oh yeah, writing cheers!
It's not clear what fluids they're messing with, but we can very clearly see a skull and crossbones on one of the bottles. Milka comments on Clem's Campster page saying that she saw him steal a bunch of Drano from the janitor's hut. Crystal gives her a pretty passive-aggressive response. When I first saw the two mixing chemicals, I was convinced that their goal was to poison the other campers. I believed that they would use this vile concoction to get back at everyone who called them annoying. However, later we can find the two on the roof of the main lodge where they discuss their project.
What's the point?
I guess soon there won't be much point to any of this, will there?
Not when we finish.
The project.
Yes.
You hear about Elton and Milka?
Oh, what?
Totally a couple now.
No way. I thought Elton loved Lily.
Yeah. Well, and I thought Milka loved Quentin.
Well, I guess if people's love was something you could trust, we wouldn't be here now, would we?
Good point as always, Clem.
Well, are you ready?
Just one more minute. Let's just watch the sun until it sets.
All right. Let's let people have one last sunset before things change forever.
Forever.
Now it's abundantly clear that their intention isn't to kill the other campers. It's instead to take. Their Campster pages are even riddled with references to their depression. Starting with Crystal, her About Me section directly references an incident that occurred last year at camp. She writes, "And all that stuff that happened last year will never happen again. I promise." Mostly because they won't let Clem or I have sharp things anymore. Sillies. Why would I want to hurt myself? One of Crystal's favorite movies is Legally Blonde, and I mean, does this one really need an introduction? And the other is The Virgin Suicides. This film focuses on the Libson sisters, who, by the film's end, all in varying and gruesome ways. The final nail in the coffin is Crystal's photos. Here we have images of people cheering, a photo of Crystal, and the last photo is an image of someone. Clem's Campster page is similar. His About Me section reads, "Come on, we all feel down sometimes, and who hasn't thought about maybe taking now and then? I know I have. Sometimes the glass is half full for me, and sometimes it's half full of poison. But I always muddle through somehow." Clem's favorite movie is Better Off Dead, a film about a kid who becomes depressed after his girlfriend leaves him for the captain of the ski team. After this, tries multiple times to but fails in comedic ways. Despite the premise sounding really morbid, it plays out more like a dark comedy. What's interesting about this film is that it has a pretty hopeful and optimistic ending. I think that this film is a comfort movie for Clem. The way that we see the protagonist overcome his depression likely inspires Clem. It's Clem's way of cheering for himself even when he feels like no one else is. Clem's photos have images of positive messages, images of success, a photo of Clem himself, and an image of a cliff. The text above the cliff is a bit hard to read, but we can barely make out that it says, Lover's Leap, Rock City Gardens. This one is leagues more subtle than Crystal's photos. Anyone could assume that Clem just might be big into hiking and nature, and that Rock City is a place he'd love to visit someday. After sifting through their Campster pages, I wanted to know more about what caused this behavior in Crystal and Clem. On Ellen's page, we can see a conversation between the duo about canoeing. Clem comments, "My dad says I'm a total idiot when it comes to canoeing, and most other things. He said he'd rather ride a seal into a pool of sharks than ride into a canoe with me. Sometimes I wonder if he's right, if I am too stupid for this world." Clem's relationship with his father has no doubt contributed to Clem's feelings of hopelessness and sorrow. It seems that these emotions were only magnified after coming to camp, as Crystal and Clem seem aware that the other campers find them annoying. As for Crystal, I couldn't find much about her home life or other tragic events that may have influenced her. However, I did notice that her favorite book is the same as Milka's, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. This leads me to believe that maybe Crystal is similar to Milka, suffering from neglect at home. Despite their efforts, Clem and Crystal's project ends up failing. The poison they ingested didn't damage them. After this, it dawned on them that they wanted to put their efforts towards making the world a better place, especially in dark times. The story of Crystal and Clem is easily the most depressing side story at camp. The way their depression is represented in the game is eerily similar to the real world. Specifically how Crystal and Clem constantly suppress their feelings with an overdose of positivity. On a happier note, I noticed something interesting on Crystal's page. On May 27th, 2003, campers began asking if Crystal was okay. Even Lily, who hates using social media, reaches out to Crystal. It's obvious that some event happened that incited these comments. This must have been sometime before Crystal became friends with Clem, as we see her asking him to be her scavenger hunt partner on June 13th, 2003. It's honestly just really heartwarming to see the other campers express concern for Crystal. Even when Bobby Fidello tries to ridicule her, Chops is quick to shoot him down. Ultimately, the greatest part of these camper side stories is seeing each camper triumph over the adversity in their lives. One thing that I love about Psychonauts is how it tackles mental illness with humor without belittling or ridiculing those who suffer from it. A quote from Tim Schafer, creative director on Psychonauts, talks about this in an interview with PC Gamer. In the article, Schafer says, "Psychonauts was an exercise in dealing with mental illness in a comic way. The team were conscious of never punching down and wanted players to empathize with the characters. This is something that sticks with me, especially later in the game when we meet adult characters struggling with mental illness. The devs really put a lot of care into every character, and it shows. I think that it's asinine that you can completely miss out on a majority of this stuff by running straight for the goal, which, yeah, speaking of the goal, we should get back to the main story now. At camp, Raz needs to earn merit badges to unlock his psychic abilities. These merit badges can only be earned from the adult Psychonauts at camp. The only way that he can show he's worthy of each badge is by hopping into each of their minds via astral projection. Each mind you visit serve as the major levels that make up Psychonauts, with the camp just being the hub world. The first level takes place inside the mind of Morceau Oleander, the camp's head coach. It's a harsh and unsettling introduction to the mind, reflective of how Oleander believes he needs to toughen up the campers. It's far from the scariest level in Psychonauts, but it's still really tense and anxious. Oleander's mind is presented as a dark, war-torn battlefield, dressed from head to toe with war memorabilia. His psyche is accessorized with giant combat knives, dog tags, and hedgehogs. The leftover bullet belts and barbed wire mimic plant life, and explosions annihilate any moment of peace lingering in the air. In basic braining, we learned about a few things that every mind has: We'll cover them quickly since we may discuss some of these things in future minds. The first thing we learn about are figments of the imagination. Figments are the imagination made manifest, appearing as these flat drawings. Oleander's mind is full of figments resembling soldiers and weapons. Next, we learn of emotional baggage. These are giant pieces of luggage that cry until they're brought their matching bag tag. The eerie thing about emotional baggage is that their crying mimics the person they belong to, so all of Oleander's baggage sounds like him crying. I only realized this until capturing B-roll for this video, and it's a pretty cool / depressing detail. After that, we discover memory vaults. These little vaults run around and guard important memories belonging to a mind. In Oleander's vault, we see his proudest memories of serving in the military, leading the charge into battle, jumping from planes, and helping victims of war. Lastly, we learn about mental cobwebs. These giant purple webs appear in areas of the mind that go a long time without being used. Past a mental cobweb in Oleander's mind, we can find another memory vault. This one, titled Oleander's Shame, tells the story of how Oleander joined the military. However, his height led to him being rejected from the Army, Air Force, Navy, and even the mess hall. So, wait, he never went to the military? Then what is all of this? Was that first memory vault a fabrication? Why go through the effort of lying? What is he trying to hide? After opening this memory vault, the cracks in Oleander's mind begin to form. This level feels unnerving in a way that is totally unique from when you first entered. Later in the game, Raz unlocks the ability to use clairvoyance, a psychic ability that allows you to see the world from someone else's perspective. If you use clairvoyance on the rabbits in Oleander's mind, they see Raz as a giant butcher soaked in blood. That's not the only reference to butchers. One of Oleander's figments is a giant meat cleaver. It might not seem out of place given that many of the figments resemble weapons, but those are weapons that are common at war. Things like guns, grenades, knives. The cleaver feels totally out of place. Another thing wrong with Oleander's mind is the complete absence of sensors. These little businessmen with stamps are sensors. We learn later from Psychonaut agent Sasha 9 that sensors are a healthy part of the mind's immune system. They exist within any sane person's mind and stamp out anything that doesn't belong. Things like waking dreams, hallucinations, and foreign bodies like Raz and his fellow campers. So even if Sasha were to willingly invite you into his mind, his sensors will still attack you. But not a single sensor is found in Oleander's mind, implying that he may be suffering from some kind of mental illness. Something is definitely wrong here, but it's too early to solve this mystery. For now, keep Oleander's mind in your back pocket. We'll come back to this later. After completing basic braining, we can hop on over to the mind of Milla Vodello, a psychonaut that's an expert at levitation. Completing her levitation obstacle course is necessary to earn our levitation merit badge. Milla's mind matches her upbeat and bubbly personality. Her mind is a vibrant party full of flashing lights and shimmering disco balls. It's a blast to play through this level and put your levitation skills to the test. Then, if you want to take a break, you can go ahead and dance with your fellow campers. So why are we talking about this? This level is the furthest thing you can get from anything scary or spooky. While it's true that the majority of this level is upbeat and campy, there is a dark secret hidden in Milla's mind. While it's easy to miss, you can find an obscure room hidden behind a figment. Step inside and Milla urges you to leave.
Now why would you want to come in here? Come on, this room's no fun. Let's leave, baby.
The room appears to be some kind of nursery. It's dark, with the only source of light coming from the window on the ceiling. The room contains a memory vault and 4 figments resembling children. Smash open the vault and we get to see a memory titled Milla's Children. From this memory, we learn about Milla's time working at an orphanage. She does a lot for these children, reading them bedtime stories, feeding them, and singing with them. She had a strong connection with every single child there. One day on her way back, she found the orphanage engulfed with flames. Her emotions reached a fever pitch and she had her first psychic experience. Her psychic abilities allowed her to hear the voices of the children as they burned in the fire. Despite covering her ears and closing her eyes, the screams of the children rang out and reverberated in her mind. If you look over to the corner of the room, you'll find a giant toy box. Hitting it will open the box, but Milla begs you not to go inside.
Now you definitely don't want to go in there. That's a party killer right there.
Hop in and you'll find this. Demonic creatures lurk on the outside of a giant cage, each of them whispering haunting phrases. These creatures are called nightmares. They represent overwhelming feelings of trauma and guilt in a person's mind. The nightmares here are emblematic of the children Milla could not save. A piece of concept art for Psychonauts reveals that the nightmares were originally going to be called demons. I personally like this name way more. I feel like it matches their appearance better. The creatures look as if they just crawled straight out of hell. I mean, look at their bodies. What I thought was just a purple void is actually a swarm of faces contorting with agony. This room in Milla's backstory is nothing short of heartbreaking. Her story highlights the horror of being a psychic. While many would view telepathy as an extraordinary gift, Milla's telepathy exacerbated a traumatic experience. This introduces the concept that psychics aren't fully capable of controlling their powers when they first awaken to them. It makes you wonder about how other people may have felt when they first used their powers. Think of how Dogen must have felt to suddenly see someone's head explode right before his eyes. Milla's secret room sits in the video game Easter Egg Hall of Fame. If you've ever looked up compilations of creepy Easter eggs in video games, you've likely seen this room before. But one thing that I see people neglect to mention are the unused voice lines that were planned for this room. Over on the cutting room floor, we can find several of Milla's voice lines that were cut from the game. These lines are said to be tied to certain figments and were meant to play when these figments were collected. It was likely going to be the figments of the children. The lines are spoken by Milla as she relives the incident of the burning orphanage. It's not super graphic, but these lines are really upsetting, so listen at your own risk.
Who's going to adopt these poor children? Hey, what's that smoke over the village? Oh, the orphanage! It's on fire! Oh no! The children! Someone save the children! Please, someone help! Oh God, no! The babies! I can hear them! Can't you hear them? They're screaming! They're frightened! Don't cry, my darlings! Please stop crying! Please!
With Milla being such a joyful and enthusiastic character, you never would have guessed she was hiding such a horrifying past. I think that's what makes her feel so relatable. I'm sure we've all known someone who maintains their gleeful nature even when they grapple with sorrow. I'm just happy that Milla's been able to move on from this tragedy. Once we've got the levitation merit badge from Milla, we head back to camp and rendezvous with Psychonaut agent Sasha 9. We're helping him with his experiments using a device called a brain tumbler. This device is capable of sending Raz inside of his own mind to unlock Raz's full psychic potential. However, psychic interference of some kind teleports us to a sinister mental landscape. The area appears to be some kind of dark forest. Fog rolls along the ground and twisted, coiled up plant life decorates the walls. The bushes produce a hissing sound similar to rattlesnakes, and some of the plant life even springs to life to attack. We also find random pieces of meat scattered around for some reason. Our progress is brought to a halt when a shadowy creature with glowing eyes approaches Raz. While the creature looks threatening, all it takes is one psi blast to send it packing. Kinda disappointing, but it won't be the last we see of that creature. As we continue, we eventually discover a giant tower in the heart of the forest. Inside, we're introduced to Dr. Lobato, a mad scientist trying to steal Dogen's brain. We scale the giant vine alongside the tower and make our way inside, but it's too late. Lobato uses some kind of powder to get Dogen to sneeze his brain out. It splatters against the wall, cranial fluid painting the area. We learn that Lobato has his sights set on stealing all of the campers' brains, with Lily being his next target. We chase after Dogen's brain and uncover another dark truth. These brains are going to be used to power giant battle tanks, and the one behind these schemes is none other than Coach Oleander. My favorite part of this level is easily Dr. Lobato's reveal. He's so cartoonishly evil, but he's also just the right amount of creepy. I love his toothy grin, the giant hook hand, and his big white lab coat.
I hate to be so blunt, but you have the insanity of a manatee!
I know. People are always saying that. What do you think's wrong with my brain, Doctor?
How should I know? I'm a dentist.
It feels like Lobato is what you'd get if you asked a kid afraid of dentists to draw one. I also love how Lobato's introduction shifts the story. We're no longer just having fun at summer camp. We're now on a mission to save our friend's brains from a twisted doctor. Once the brain tumbler experiment is over, Sasha quickly heads off on some official Psychonauts business. Now it's up to Raz to stop Lobato and Oleander. Outside of Sasha's lair, we can explore the campgrounds at night. It's the same camp as before, no radical changes, but it feels totally different. Without the usual chit-chat of the nearby campers, this place feels hollow and lonely. The only real change to the camp is that at night, the Psy Bears are more plentiful than usual. You'll also be introduced to a new type of spine-tingling creature, the Psy Cougars. Just like the Psy Bears, they also possess incredible psychic powers. However, the Cougars don't specialize in telekinesis. Instead, the Cougars will use pyrokinesis to set you ablaze. The utter confusion and panic I felt when I first saw Raz spontaneously ignite was incredible. For a brief moment, you can see a thermometer appear next to Raz and watch the temperature quickly rise to a scorching heat. Those few seconds are all you're spared to run away before you get roasted. The Psy Cougars are an amazing addition to the hostile wildlife at Whispering Rock. My only gripe with them is that they don't chase you. It's only until you get too close to them that they try to light you on fire and attack. They're still frightening creatures, of course, but I still think that the Psy Bear has an edge on them. It also doesn't help that you can avoid the Cougars entirely by using the underground rail system. Just transport to the area you need to go to next to advance the story, and you're all good. At the beach and boathouse area, Raz meets with Lily and the two get a chance encounter with the camp's mythical lake monster. This beast has been teased since the beginning of the game when Bobby Zilch tries to scare Dogen with the creature's alleged existence. But here we finally get to confirm the legend for ourselves. The beast turns out to be the shadowy creature that we found in the brain tumbler experiment. It snatches Lily and we use the camp bathysphere to chase after her. We end up falling into a giant pocket of air and initiate battle against the lake monster. Once you land a good few hits on the creature, we get to play through a very cool and nerve-wracking chase sequence. The lake monster grabs the pocket of air and pushes it along the bottom of the lake, forcing us to run and platform our way forward. You've got to take extreme care in staying inside that air bubble. Step outside for just a moment and Raz immediately drowns. Get too close to the edge of the bubble and you can even see two hands of Galokio eager to grab Raz. You aren't given 1 second of peace during this chase. Just when you thought you had some good distance on the lake monster, the air bubble would unveil a huge structure that you need to platform your way through. And you couldn't afford to panic. You had to nail those jumps or you were gonna drown. A neat detail about this chase is that we experience it through the eyes of the lake monster. It reminds me a lot of the chase in Rayman 2 in the Cave of Bad Dreams. Similarly, in this chase you also see it from the monster's perspective. However, this time you see it through the mouth of the creature as opposed to its eyes. It's such a minor detail that goes a long way in making this chase feel like a real fight for your life. In fact, the chase from Rayman 2 may have even inspired the lake monster chase in Psychonauts. In a documentary on the Double Fine YouTube channel called The Color of the Sky in Your World, Tim Schafer talks about how Rayman 2 had a huge influence on Psychonauts. After the chase and fight with the lake monster, we enter her mind via Psy portal to root out her mental problems so that she stops kidnapping people. This level isn't what I would classify as a horror-themed world or anything spooky, but I had to bring it up because I love how this level plays on the relationship between Raz and the lake monster. Her name is Linda, by the way, so I'll be calling her that from now on. During the chase we just played through, Raz was horrified of Linda, but when we hop inside of her mind, we see that Linda is just as afraid of Raz. He appears in her mind as a giant monster terrorizing a city full of lungfish. You battle against the city's military, destroy buildings, and you can even squash the citizens if you're not careful. It's just so cool. Reminds me a lot of Rampage. Did you guys ever play those games? Ugh, I loved them to bits. After we clear Linda's mind, she takes us to the place where we can find Lobato and Oleander. Thorney Towers, home for the disturbed. An abandoned mental asylum. The asylum bears a ghoulish appearance, a result of the toll that time has taken on this place. Nearly every aspect of the asylum is withered and deteriorating. The eerie nature of the asylum stretches beyond the building itself. Take a look at those swirling green skies above. You can clearly make out faces screaming and twisting in the air as they stir around the asylum. As you explore the asylum, you'll find the brains of your fellow campers in jars. You can collect them and return them to their rightful owner, increasing Raz's max health in the process. While collecting brains is pretty repulsive in its own right, what grossed me out the most is what Raz does when he gets a brain.
Bobby Zilch? I didn't know you had a brain. Man, I wish you were here for that joke, Bobby.
Why does he kiss it? He does this every time, and it never fails to make me recoil in disgust. Why can't he just do a little dance or something? One thing that I was always curious about in this place is that stone statue that sits in the center of the courtyard. It spurred all kinds of questions regarding the origins of the asylum. Luckily, that log back in the parking lot at Whispering Rock has all the answers. According to the log documents, prospectors and settlers came and took up residence at Whispering Rock 100 years ago. They named this town Shaky Claim. 99 years ago, a case of paranormal hysteria broke out in the town. This mass hysteria was caused by the giant Psychonauts deposit that the town was built on top of. 75 years ago, Houston Thorney built the mental asylum to combat the epidemic of insanity. 60 years ago, there ended up being more patients in the asylum than residents in the town. Houston Thorney ended up off the tower at the asylum. 55 years ago, the federal government paid the remaining residents of Shaky Claim to leave. The town was then flooded, creating Lake Oblongata. For me, this backstory breathes new life into Thorney Towers. The story behind this place is just so intriguing, and the fact that it's buried in an obscure object that you have to go out of your way to discover is mind-boggling. I didn't even know you could interact with that log in the parking lot until I started doing research for this video. Now I finally know that the man at the center of the courtyard is probably Houston Thorney. The history on the log also explains the buildings that we come across during the chase with Linda. These buildings, this area, this is Shaky Claim. We actually get to see it ourselves. That's so cool. Also, can we talk about the effects of Psychonauts? The high volume of this material at Whispering Rock being able to induce widespread hysteria is fascinating. I wish we could have learned more about what occurred during this period of insanity. Think about it, a town full of people whose minds are slowly unraveled by an alien mineral. There's so much potential for a horror story there, especially since we've seen how Psychonauts can awaken one's psychic potential. And as we know from Mia's backstory, people can struggle with learning to control these powers. Imagine a town full of psychics with barely any control over their abilities. I can't help but wonder what Shaky Claim was like at the peak of this insanity outbreak. Moving on from the history of Thorney Towers, it's time to talk about some of the asylum's residents. At Thorney Towers, there are 4 people whose minds we can explore with the Psy portal. First, there's the mind of Fred Bonaparte. a descendant of the real Napoleon Bonaparte. Fred's mind is presented as a board game being played between Fred and Napoleon. His mind represents how Fred and this Napoleon persona are constantly competing for control in Fred's body. This competition is reflected by Fred in the real world as he constantly flips between the two identities. The level itself isn't creepy, but it is fun to play and platform through this little board game. Up next, there's the mind of Edgar Teagley, an artist troubled by his past. Edgar's mind appears as a beautifully colored world. When it comes to pure aesthetics, Black Velvetopia is easily my favorite level in Psychonauts. The closest thing to anything frightening in his mind is the giant bull that roams the streets, El Odio. But it's not like the bull stalks you or anything, he just runs by every few seconds. Then if you happen to get caught, he drags you for a little bit, then throws you off. It's nothing too extreme. Then there's the mind of Gloria von Guten, a retired actress that still yearns for the spotlight. Gloria's mind is illustrated as a giant stage play that recounts the events of her life. This is another level that doesn't jump out at you with a horrific atmosphere, but Gloria has an interesting and tragic backstory that I want to highlight. In a memory vault titled Gloria's Cruel Training, we learn of Gloria's awful childhood. As a kid, she was sent to Hagatha's home for girls. Here, Gloria was taught how to sing, dance, and act, all with perfect execution. Her cruel instructor often physically and verbally abused the children who failed to meet expectations. In another memory vault titled Gloria's Fallen Star, we get to see Gloria's life after Hagatha's home. Gloria ended up becoming a world-famous actress. She brought in full houses and the critics loved her. She always left the audience wanting more. She even ended up winning an award. However, one day she received news that her mother had. This traumatic experience forever impacted Gloria's ability to act. People were no longer impressed with Gloria's talents and were quick to call out her flaws. Her fall from fame is ultimately what caused the violent mood swings we see her display in the real world. The play in Gloria's mind tells the full story, the things we don't get to see in the memory vaults. From the play we learn that Gloria's mother, Estella von Guten, was initially hesitant to leave Gloria at Hagatha's home for girls. All it took was a little convincing from Estella's manager before she caved and shipped off Gloria. Eventually though, Estella did come back for her, albeit much later. Gloria's fame skyrocketed once she was able to land a role in a Broadway musical. Estella's pride quickly turned to jealousy as Gloria's newfound fame grew to extraordinary heights. After years of cruel treatment from Estella, Gloria fled to Europe to escape. Before Gloria left, she got into an argument with her mother. In this argument, her mother threatened to do something awful to herself if Gloria dared to leave. From there, the memory vaults explain the rest. This is another backstory that I feel is really easy to overlook. You don't need to watch every single one of those stage play scenes, and there's a lot of them to see. This level has a slow start that's more focused on puzzle solving, so you may feel the urge to skip these scenes and get back into the platforming action. It's also pretty difficult to take this story seriously as it's being portrayed by some of the worst actors I've ever seen.
Mother, tell me true of the dad I never knew. He was brave in thought and deed. Can't you hear his mighty steed?
Now, obviously, the bad acting is intentional. I like to think that Gloria's mind being full of bad actors is a reflection of how she believes her acting abilities have deteriorated. That, and maybe turning your past trauma into a rough stage play, makes the whole experience much easier to cope with.
Hey, cue the magical balloon, moron!
Hey, there's no magical balloon on this set, but that won't stop me from jumping down there and kicking your ass. So watch it.
Moving on, there's one more resident of the asylum that we haven't discussed yet. Funnily enough, this is also the first person you meet when you arrive. This is Boyd Cooper, the guard of the asylum who has the front gates locked. He sits here and scribbles on the walls with chalk, muttering conspiracies to himself. If you ask him to unlock the gates, he claims that only the Milkman has the key. And with no other clues regarding the Milkman's whereabouts, you've got no choice but to step inside Boyd's mind. Inside his mind, a suburban neighborhood sits in a bottomless void of white and blue. The streets float off and stretch in random directions, no longer bound by gravity. The people hide in bushes and mailboxes to discreetly stalk your every move, and red-eyed men in trench coats linger in the streets. It's no conspiracy that something is wrong in this neighborhood. Boyd's mental landscape perfectly represents how his paranoid delusions have twisted his perception of reality. In his mind, you're able to fully grasp his sense of paranoia. You feel what he feels, like the whole world is secretly conspiring against you. Go for a stroll down the street and you can catch people inside of bushes, lawn flamingos, and mailboxes snapping photos of you. Turn around and suddenly they stop. Continue down the street and the people inside the mailboxes will slowly creep towards you. If you try to escape by entering any of the houses in the neighborhood, suddenly you're being watched through the home's security cameras. Even the figments in Boyd's mind teeter between totally normal and suspicious. Some figments appear as regular adults and kids, while others appear as adults and kids equipped with radars and antennas. You can't trust anyone or anything you meet in this world. The mental figures in Boyd's mind are also pretty suspicious. Starting with the Rainbow Squirts, these are a troop of Girl Scouts that closely follow Raz whenever he's nearby. They study his every move and stealthily communicate with their fellow scouts. They're kind of annoying too. Then there's the G-Men, tall men in trench coats that block certain areas as they attempt to gather information on the Milkman. While the G-Men originally came off as creepy, I think they're actually pretty funny. Their spy versus spy looks, paired with the way they often misuse the tools they're working with, is really goofy. They also have some really good lines.
I am making a pie.
I hope you are not trying to steal my husband, tramp.
One thing I learned about during research was that the earlier drafts of this level had more literally reflected the feeling of being at the center of a giant conspiracy. In the previously mentioned The Color of the Sky in Your World documentary, Schaefer comments that Boyd's house was originally going to be at the center of a giant spiderweb of streets. That was until concept artist Peter Chan presented Schaefer with the idea of having the streets floating and twisting in the sky. While I love the idea of having Boyd literally at the center of everything, something about those floaty streets makes this level iconic, especially the way the gravity shifts as you walk along the street and jump to different floating islands. It's like Super Mario Galaxy before Super Mario Galaxy. Now, what about the Milkman himself? Why does he have the asylum gate key? To uncover the truth, we need to take a look at Boyd's memory vaults. The first vault, titled Boyd Fired Again, illustrates Boyd's past as a night guard at a store. One day he was fired by his boss, and in retaliation, Boyd created Molotov cocktails with milk bottles and lit the store on fire. He watched it all burn, and was subsequently sent to Thorney Towers. In the second vault, titled Boyd Hired Again, we see that Coach Oleander approached Boyd in Thorney Towers. Oleander hypnotized Boyd and got him to serve as a security guard for the asylum. Somehow Oleander was also able to create an alternate identity in Boyd's head, the one that we call the Milkman. This persona was seemingly scrapped together by Boyd's history, specifically taking advantage of the night where he burned down the store. When the Milkman is freed in Boyd's consciousness, we see how it affects him in the real world. He opens up the gates and prepares to lob a Molotov at the asylum. This right here is the Milkman's purpose. When the Milkman takes control over Boyd's mind, he immediately prepares to burn down the whole asylum. Now, how does Oleander benefit from this? The idea is that if things go south with his schemes, then he can rely on the Milkman to burn down the asylum and erase any evidence that would link Oleander to these crimes. Oleander is skilled in the art of mental manipulation, so it's possible that he had a way to trigger the Milkman's release whenever he wanted. This also explains why the G-Men are so desperate to find the Milkman. They know that the Milkman is a foreign entity that negatively impacts Boyd's mental health. They even work closely with the sensors to try and eliminate the Milkman. The fact that the sensors aren't targeting Raz and solely focus their efforts on the Milkman demonstrates that this character is a massive threat to Boyd's sanity. On the opposite end of things, the Rainbow Squirts are trying to protect the Milkman because they know what will happen when he is released. The Rainbow Squirts are in actuality trying to protect Boyd. Think about the mental stress that would come with Boyd lighting another fire and reliving the emotions that he felt when he initially snapped. Another quote from Schaefer in the interview with PC Gamer confirms this. In the article, Schaefer says, "All the things that seem like antagonists in this level are like an immune system trying to understand an alien body in its midst. And that alien body is what the Milkman represents. This thing that is there and buried, but he can't get rid of. and he knows something bad is going to happen as a result. The memory vault illustrating the burning of the store shows a gleeful expression on Boyd's face, but that doesn't mean he feels no remorse for his actions. The mini-bosses in Boyd's mind verifies his guilt. When you leave the post office, this happens. You have to battle a nightmare, a creature we first saw in Mia's mind. As a quick reminder, nightmares represent intense feelings of guilt. It's safe to assume that the nightmares in Boyd's mind are a result of the regret he feels for burning down the store. It's interesting that both Mia and Boyd's nightmares are tied to fires. The arena that the battle takes place in even looks like some version of hell. This not only reinforces the relation to fire, but also emphasizes Boyd's guilt. Some part of him may be subconsciously wondering if his actions have earned him suffering in the afterlife. Before we move on, I want to bring up a pretty cool Easter egg. For context, the last ability you unlock is called the Confusion Grenade. This ability inflicts a target with confusion, causing them to temporarily spew nonsense. If you use this ability on Boyd, it actually grants him a moment of clarity.
It's all in a big fight over... Wait a minute. I think there might not be a conspiracy after all. It's possible I am suffering from paranoid delusions linked to an entity I call the Milkman, who is, in actuality, the mummified remains of Abraham Lincoln.
It's yet another cool detail that's very easy to miss. After helping each of the asylum's residents, Raz is free to climb to the upper levels of Thorney Towers. These floors are just as, if not more unsettling than the ground floor. A silence hangs in the air and someone is watching you. For a brief moment, you can spot someone in red staring at you before they hide. Once we reach the top of the tower, we finally get to meet this character. Her name is Shigor, and she's an unwilling servant for Dr. Lobato. If she ever disobeys, he threatens to murder her beloved pet turtle, Mr. Pokelope. We manage to free him with telekinesis and hatch a plan to stop Lobato. By putting the turtle's brain inside of the brain-powered weapon behind Lobato, we use the tank to blast the Mad Doctor, sending him flying down from the top of Thorney Towers. It's eerily similar to the fate of Houston Thorney. After rescuing Sasha, Mia, and Lily, all that's left is the showdown with Oleander. Oleander's brain lands inside of one of his brain-powered tanks and we take it down. Once the battle ends, Raz takes a closer look at the tank and it blasts him with sneezing powder. Now stuck as just a brain on the floor, we use telekinesis to lob ourselves into the tank with Oleander's brain. This results in a psychic fusion between the two brains as we enter the final level. The Meat Circus is a grotesque combination of both Raz and Oleander's psyche. It's made up of Raz's childhood memories of the circus and Oleander's memories of his father's butcher shop. This manifests as a circus riddled with meat. It's nauseating to look at, especially when the meat is twisted into gooey shapes that create platforms and support the circus structures. As if things couldn't get any weirder, there's also a ghostly apparition in the Meat Circus that periodically calls out to Raz. Bizarre. Inside the main tent, we find giant meat grinders. These devices crunch and spew out giant deformed rabbits. Their gangly limbs and disproportionate body makes them revolting to look at. They look as if they're holding themselves together with what little flesh they have left. I'm not sure if this level is the scariest, but it's definitely the grossest. The mental vaults here reveal Oleander's traumatizing memories of the butcher shop. In the memory vault titled The Big Top, we see a young Oleander visiting a bunch of rabbits in cages. He ended up forming a special connection with the runt of the litter, until one day Oleander's father appeared and snatched the rabbit. He took it back to the shop and slaughtered it right in front of little Ole. This moment was extremely traumatizing for Oleander, and it plagues his mind to this day. It explains some of the strange things we saw back at the beginning of the game in basic braining. Think of the rabbits that saw you as a butcher, and the giant meat cleaver Figment. Both of these things were his trauma leaking into his fantasies of war and valor. Even as an adult, Oleander can't escape his tragic childhood. It also explains all of the meat we saw during the brain tumbler experiment. Now we know for certain that psychic interference was caused by Lobato and Oleander. When I first viewed the Big Top memory vault, I instantly empathized with Oleander. Don't get me wrong, I definitely don't approve of stealing brains to power your giant war machines, but I felt really sorry for him. That image of little Ole crying his eyes out when his dad is about to kill the rabbit just breaks my heart. A quote from Schaefer in the Color of the Sky on Your World documentary perfectly captures what I'm trying to get at.
So that idea that when you fight even a monster or even a really bad guy in the game, when you go into their brain, you find that they're just dealing with their own mental demons, and it's making them act in the way that appears to be crazy. But no one in Psychonauts is kind of irredeemable. They're all, when you go into their minds, you see they're just facing a lot of tough things, and you help them fight them, and help them kind of heal or overcome, and just get some control over their moods, or get control over their outlook on life.
That's one thing that I really admire about this level, the fact that it gets you to sympathize with Oleander despite all the horrible things he's done. I also think that it was a brilliant choice to have us play alongside a young Oleander. This allows us to witness his kind and compassionate nature before it was eroded by his father's abusive behavior. It makes you genuinely want to help little Ole when demon rabbits are chasing after him, even if it can be a little challenging at times. When you reach the final circus tent, you have a showdown with the source of Oleander's trauma, his father. The Butcher is a gigantic opponent. Dressed in his uniform, the Butcher is covered in the blood of innocent rabbits. The skulls of bunnies can be found alongside the Butcher's back and the handles of his enormous cleavers. It's clear that Oleander sees his father as nothing more than a monster. Once you get his health low enough, the Butcher sends you to another circus tent and we meet the mental depiction of Raz's father. This version of Augustus is furious with Raz for pursuing his psychic talents. He accuses Raz of betraying his family. After all, it was a psychic that cursed him and all of his relatives to die in water. Augustus aims to teach Raz a lesson by flooding the tent. This forces Raz to rely on his skills as an acrobat to escape. This is a hair-raising sequence where you need to platform with precision to avoid drowning. As you climb, you need to jump through flaming hoops, spinning cleavers, and bounce on stretchy pieces of flesh, all while Augustus is tossing flaming projectiles your way. As you climb upward, you also see the thing you're climbing inside of is some kind of meat tent. You can very clearly make out these red, fleshy walls. There's also a spine and ribcage that stretches up to the roof of the tent. The gory details just don't stop in this level. When we escape, we're brought back to the Butcher. It seems that the Butcher and Augustus have decided to team up for one more fight. Ultimately, it's the same fight as before, but now Augustus is throwing flaming projectiles your way that you can use against the Butcher. At the end of this fight, the Butcher falls into the giant meat grinder at the center of the arena. We also get to meet the real Augustus Aquato. It turns out that he was the apparition calling out to Raz. Augustus reassures Raz that he doesn't hate him, nor does he hate psychics. He just wanted Raz to be safe. Augustus then knocks the evil Augustus into the giant meat grinder. Unfortunately, this ends up fusing both fathers together, creating another abomination similar to those demon bunnies. The unification of these two creatures is petrifying. For the battle, Augustus gives Raz a heap of psychic energy. This gives Raz the power to turn into a titan capable of standing toe-to-toe with a two-headed dad monster. When the titan form is charging, all you need to do is stall for time, because once it's ready, you're able to tear that monster into shreds. The monster even cowers behind their cleavers, like they know they aren't a match for Raz. It's immensely satisfying to strike fear into the things that once pushed you around. Once the monster is beaten, little Ole thanks you for sorting out the issue. He waves goodbye and his mind begins to unweave from Raz's. Outside of the mental landscape, Raz is rewarded for his efforts. He is finally recognized as an official Psychonaut. Oleander is also given a second chance. It's been proven that the personal demons responsible for his behavior have been completely eradicated, and it's an ending that I think is perfect. That was about all the elements of horror that I could find in Psychonauts. Thank you so much for coming along with me on this really long ride. I was originally planning on discussing Psychonauts 2 in this video as well, but the video ended up being way longer than I anticipated. If you want a video on the sequel, just let me know. I would be happy to oblige. I finally got around to beating the game, and I'm so happy to report that I think it is fantastic. I was so glad that I could afford this opportunity to talk about Psychonauts for so long. This game, it really means a lot to me. It's something about games from Double Fine. I don't know what it is. There's this magic that has me falling in love with the world and its characters from the moment I see those title screens. If you haven't already, please go and play Grim Fandango. It's a beautiful game. I love it so much. Let me know if there are any other non-horror games you can think of with their own spooky elements, and we may end up talking about them on another episode of Occult in the Ordinary. Thank you all so much for the support. It means the world to me. Anyways, that's all I have for you. Take care.